In 1858, Geronimo returned to his Apache camp in Sonora to find his world shattered. Mexican soldiers had struck while he was away, leaving his wife, mother, and 3 children dead in a brutal massacre. Kneeling among the ruins, he swore a vow of vengeance that would haunt Mexico for decades. By 1859, he was leading war parties that left fields of Mexican soldiers dead, their cries of Geronimo echoing in terror. Over 6,000 Mexicans and 1,000 Apache would die in a blood feud that spanned centuries. What drove this relentless cycle of hate? How did a single man's rage become a nation's nightmare? Stick around to find out. That vow of vengeance wasn't just Geronimo's, it was the heartbeat of a centuries-long feud between the Apache and Mexico. Picture 1909. Geronimo, now nearly 80, lies dying of pneumonia at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. His body's failing, but his mind is sharp, replaying a lifetime of battles. For 25 years, from 1861 to 1886, he fought the United States in the Apache Wars, watching his people lose their lands, their lives, their way of life. Yet, as he takes his final breaths, it's not the Americans he curses. It's Mexico. He regrets surrendering, not because of the U.S., but because he couldn't keep fighting south of the border. That's how deep his hatred ran. This wasn't just one man's grudge. The Apache and Mexico were locked in a blood feud that started in the 1600s under Spanish rule and burned hotter when Mexico took over in 1821. It was a clash of worlds, fueled by betrayal, brutality, and a cycle of revenge that left thousands dead. To understand why Geronimo's last thoughts were of Mexico, we need to go back to where it all began. In the deserts and mountains of a land contested by empires and warriors. Let's rewind to the 1600s, when the Apache first crossed swords with the Spanish in what's now northern Mexico. The Apache were semi-nomadic, thriving in the harsh deserts and mountains of today's Arizona, New Mexico, and Sonora. They hunted, gathered, and raided to survive, bowing to no one. When the Spanish arrived with their forts and missions demanding submission, the Apache answered with swift, relentless raids on settlements, stealing cattle and supplies. To the Spanish, these were attacks on their empire. To the Apache, it was just life. By the 1770s, the Spanish had had enough. They teamed up with the Comanche, another powerful native group with no love for the Apache, and launched a campaign that was nothing short of genocidal. Thousands of Apache were killed, entire bands wiped out, and survivors driven from the plains into the mountains. Historical records, like William Griffin's Apaches at War and Peace, estimate the Apache lost 20 to 30% of their plains population. It was a devastating blow, but the Apache didn't break. They adapted, honing their guerrilla tactics in the rugged terrain. Come the 1790s, the Spanish realized extermination wasn't working. They offered a deal: peace for rations. Thousands of Apache, battered by decades of war, settled near presidios, fortified outposts like Llanos and Santa Rita. They took Spanish names, sent kids to Spanish schools, even attended Catholic churches. The Spanish kept them fed with corn and beef, a smart move to curb raids by making the Apache dependent. For a while it worked, with Apache bands trading and living alongside the Spanish. But this peace was a house of cards, ready to collapse when the rations stopped. Mexico's independence was about to deal that blow. When Mexico broke free from Spain in 1821, it inherited a nation in chaos. The revolution had drained the treasury, and the new government was barely holding things together. The Spanish had used their colonial wealth to fund Apache rations, keeping the peace. Mexico tried to keep it going, especially in Chihuahua and Sonora, but by 1831 to 1833, the money was gone. Rations were slashed or stopped entirely, leaving Apache bands who'd relied on these supplies stranded. Here's where things got messy. Mexico expected the Apache to farm the land around presidio towns, seeing the rations as a bonus, not a lifeline. When Apache started leaving, the Mexicans felt betrayed, like a deal had been broken. But the Apache saw it differently. They weren't farmers. They were hunters and raiders, always on the move. The rations were a promise, a trade for peace. When Mexico pulled out, the Apache saw no reason to stay. Many were just 1 or 2 generations from their old ways, and they slid back into raiding like it was second nature. Their targets were practical: cattle, horses, food, guns, ammunition. But when Mexicans fought to protect their property, blood started spilling. Edwin Sweeney's Mangas Coloradas estimates Chihuahua lost 10,000 cattle a year in the early 1830s, a crippling hit that turned frustration into fury. This wasn't just a policy failure, it was a spark that reignited a feud smoldering since the Spanish days. The script points out a lesson. Cut off a community's lifeline without a plan, and you're asking for chaos. Mexico was about to learn that the hard way, as the Apache raids grew bolder and bloodier. Now that we see how Mexico's misstep set the stage, let's dig into why peace was impossible. The Apache and Mexicans weren't just fighting over resources. They were living in different worlds. The Apache weren't a single nation like Mexico assumed. They were split into tribes, like the Chiricahua and Membreño, each with smaller bands of 50 to 200 people, each band calling its own shots. Mexico would make a deal with one band, thinking it covered all 8,000 to 10,000 Apache, as Dan Thrapp's The Conquest of Apacheria estimates. But other bands kept raiding, leaving Mexico baffled and angry. The Apache also saw peace differently. A deal was with a specific town, not some distant government. They'd trade in Llanos, then raid the next town over, seeing no contradiction. Mexico, meanwhile, thought they were negotiating for entire states like Chihuahua or Sonora. Geronimo himself, in his autobiography with S.M. Barrett, admitted he couldn't grasp Mexico's centralized system. The Apache had no top-down chiefs. Decisions came from band leaders or councils. This gap wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a chasm that turned every peace talk into a dead end. Mexico's frustration grew as they realized they were chasing shadows. The Apache didn't play by their rules, and that drove them to desperate, brutal measures. The stage was set for a war where neither side could back down. With peace talks crumbling, Mexico decided to hit hard. By 1833, they were scrambling to stop the raids tearing through their frontier. They raised money through public donations, cut officials' salaries, and ordered civilian men to arm themselves and join militias. It was all hands on deck, a sign Mexico was done being patient. In 1835, Chihuahua took it further, offering 100 pesos for every adult male Apache scalp, later upping it to 200. They also paid for captured women and children who were sold into slavery in central Mexico. Ralph Smith's Borderlander says Chihuahua paid for about 2,000 scalps from 1835 to 1850, but many weren't even Apache, as hunters turned in any scalp for cash. The slavery plan flopped too. Apache, experts in their terrain, often escaped. One woman, Francesca, fled captivity, killed a mountain lion with a knife, and later married Geronimo, scars and all. Then came outright betrayal. In 1837, near the Santa Rita copper mine, John Johnson invited 50 Apache under Juan Jose Compa to trade, offering flour and liquor. As they ate, his men opened fire with a cannon and rifles, killing about 20, including Juan Jose. Mexico also exploited Apache drinking, attacking when warriors were drunk, forcing leaders to limit who could drink at celebrations. Mexico thought this brutality would break the Apache, but they misjudged their enemy. Unlike the Spanish Comanche campaign that nearly crushed them, these tactics only fueled Apache rage. The Apache were about to show Mexico what defiance really looked like. Apache phản kháng và các lãnh đạo nổi bật. Mexico's cruelty didn't scare the Apache. It forged warriors who hit back harder. After the 1837 Santa Rita massacre, Mangas Coloradas, a towering Membreño leader, took charge. He was cunning and fearless, turning betrayal into vengeance. That same year, his warriors ambushed 22 fur trappers near Santa Rita, leaving no survivors. The attack was so devastating that the copper mine shut down for nearly 35 years, until the 1870s, when 300 to 400 Mexicans fled to Llanos Presidio for safety. Mangas struck again, killing or capturing most in a brutal ambush. His rage showed Mexico the Apache weren't just surviving, they were striking at the heart of their economy. Decades later, in the 1870s and 1880s, Juh, an Edney Apache, kept the fight alive. He rejected the U.S.'s San Carlos reservation, calling it slavery, and led his band into Mexico, seeing Mexicans as invaders. In a rare meeting with Chihuahua's governor, Juh agreed to spare female cattle to save the herds, but exploded when asked to stop scalping. He pointed out the Apache only started scalping because of Mexico's 1835 bounties. Juh's jab hit hard. Mexico paid for thousands of scalps, far more than the Apache's 8,000 population, as fraudsters cashed in on any scalp. Edwin Sweeney estimates 6,000 Mexicans and 1,000 Apache died in Chihuahua and Sonora from 1830 to 1850, a grim tally of the feud's cost. Mexico didn't help itself. In 1839, James Kirker led a 200-man army that killed friendly Apache negotiating peace, a blunder that sparked more raids. The script calls out Mexico's "any Indian is a bad Indian" mindset, shared by the U.S., which ignored Apache band distinctions and fueled the cycle of revenge. These leaders showed the Apache's unbreakable spirit, but one man's story would define it like no other. As Apache leaders like Mangas and Juh struck fear into Mexico, one man's rage burned brightest. In 1858, Geronimo's life shattered when 400 Mexican soldiers attacked his rancheria near Llanos, Sonora, while he was trading. They killed his wife, mother, and 3 children, leaving him to swear eternal vengeance. By 1859, he led a war party to Arispe, once Sonora's capital. 8 warriors killed and scalped men, capturing women and children to lure troops. That night, Geronimo's band rested, ready for a fight. The next morning, 2 infantry columns and a cavalry unit Geronimo recognized from the 1858 massacre marched into the trap. In a rare head-on assault, the Apache fought for 2 hours. Geronimo, out of arrows and spears, used a knife, dodging blows and killing soldiers. In a desperate wrestle, he stabbed a saber-wielding soldier, collapsing covered in blood. The field was strewn with 50 to 70 Mexican dead. Per Angie Debo's Geronimo, as Apache warriors cheered. Some say the soldiers cried Geronimo, invoking Saint Jerome, or mispronounced his birth name, Goyakla. Either way, the name stuck. From 1859 to 1861, Geronimo led 4 more raids, killing about 200 Mexicans a year, but his recklessness drew criticism from Apache wary of losses to their small population. His name became a curse in Mexico, shouted in battle. Geronimo's vengeance embodied the Apache's defiance, but it came at a cost, pushing his people toward a breaking point. Geronimo's raids couldn't last forever. In 1880, Mexico dealt a blow by killing Chiricahua leader Victorio at Tres Castillos, Chihuahua, thrusting Geronimo into a leadership role. By the mid-1880s, Mexico and the U.S. joined forces, with Mexico sending 2,000 troops to hunt Geronimo's band. Outnumbered, with only 500 warriors left by 1886, per Dalton N. Thraps, the conquest of Apacheria, Geronimo surrendered to the U.S. in Skeleton Canyon. He and his people were sent to Florida, then Alabama, and finally Fort Sill by 1894, their way of life gone. At Fort Sill, Geronimo dictated his 1906 autobiography with S.M. Barrett, pouring out his hatred for Mexico above all else. The feud's toll was staggering. Thousands dead, towns abandoned, a people nearly erased. Mexico's scalp bounties and massacres aimed to crush the Apache, but their resilience turned every blow into a call to fight. The script shows a cycle of hate where neither side could yield, a lesson in how brutality breeds defiance. But the Apache spirit didn't die with Geronimo's surrender. A few warriors were ready to carry the fight into a new century. Even after 1886, the Apache weren't finished. Bands known as the Bronco Apache hid in Mexico's Sierra Madre, raiding into the 1920s and 1930s, defying both nations. Their story, full of grit and resistance, is coming in our next video, so don't miss it. This feud teaches us how misunderstandings, like the Apache's band structure versus Mexico's rigid system, can spark war. It shows how brutality, from scalp bounties to massacres, fuels revenge, and how vendettas like Geronimo's can define a people's fight. What hit you hardest about this story? The betrayals, Geronimo's rage, or the Apache's unbreakable will? Drop your thoughts in the comments, ask questions, or suggest what you want next. Maybe more Apache tales or other Wild West sagas. Your input shapes our channel, so let's keep the fire burning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.